common super like non-super being, you know? And yeah, it's like Batman. The thing is, Batman is really important because there's been many times where Batman has even fought like gods, so-called gods, and stuff like that, and he's beaten them before. Obviously, with the help of all the other superheroes, but pretty much he was like the mastermind. And the thing is, he always thinks ahead. He's always one step ahead. And it's like later on, eventually they discover that Batman has a database in his Batcave that has all the weaknesses of all the enemies and superheroes that they've encountered. And whatchamacallit, Superman doesn't like that. He's have in your database something that shows how to kill me. And he's like, Batman is like, because I never know when or how you could possibly ever go wrong. And if that ever happens, I have to make sure to keep the world safe. He's like, I can't let you destroy the world. Like, I know what you're capable of, and I can't let that happen. And then Superman just kind of gets upset. He's like, then why don't you have like, why are you not in the West? And Batman just stays quiet. He's just like, he doesn't know what to say. Well, I guess pretty much all he can say is like, I'm just a human being. You know, what can there be so difficult to defeat me? You know, and that's pretty much when Superman just feels like, how can I explain it? He feels betrayed in a way. He's like, you have everyone's weaknesses except your own. And it's like, I guess Batman just feels that he cannot be corrupted. He just can't be corrupted. He always has like that will to fight for what is justice. And it's like, even when he's like really old, so like, okay, like, have you seen the Batman movies before?
Which ones are you talking about? The Christopher Nolan
Um,
ones?
the Christopher Nolan trilogy.
Oh, so the good ones.
Yeah, the good ones,
The
not
only
the
ones that are actually
'90s
worth
one.
watching. Yeah.
Yeah, not the Michael. What's his name? Was the actor Michael something? The guy, I forgot his name. The one from the '90s that has freaking Jim Carrey. Yeah, not those.
Okay.
Although I actually did like those. But anyway, the Christopher trilogy. In the second and third movie, Batman is actually supposed to be old, even though they put Chris. What's his name? That what's his name? Christian Bale. They put Christian Bale in the movies as Batman, but in The Dark Knight Returns, the third movie, or in the second movie, he's supposed to be old Batman. In that point, he's supposed to be 50 something, 60 something, no longer fit for fighting against enemies. But the thing is, his desire, like in the comics, my bad, in the comics, like, that's what happens. He's like, in that era, he's like really old, but he like pretty much retired, and that's why you see like, you know how like in the movie you see like, oh, will Batman ever return? And they're like looking for Batman, and then the criminals are just doing all the crap and stuff like that. And what you call it? Batman tells his called his butler. He tells him, "Hey, Alfred, I need to return." And he's like, "No, Batman, you no Bruce Wayne, you are too old for this. Like your time has come. Like you are a human. Your limitations have come. You've done so much for Gotham City. You just need to like focus on your life and just like go out, you know, with a bang, whatever." And but Batman, he's just so fueled, seeing all the corruption, seeing all the problems of the world, that he's like, no, I have to do something about it. Like he feels his time is not over yet until it actually is. He's like, he wants to fight till the very damn end. So pretty much, that's when what happens there is Batman versus Superman, and that's when he's like 50 or 60 years old. But they in the movie, in the comics, he actually, I think he gets like a heart attack or some kind of crap like that, and it's actually Batman that dies and not Superman. Like, you know how in Batman vs Superman, Superman dies, they buried him and all that kind of crap. But it's actually the other way around in the comics or something like that. And it's like Batman supposedly dies. Like he's fighting with Superman. He makes like this suit, he fights with Superman, and then Superman like hears his heart. He's like, Bruce Wayne, I can hear your heart. Like, are you okay? He's like, no, I'm gonna defeat you because you're just causing problems. But he's just gone. Batman has just gone crazy. He's just like thinks that Superman is no good for the city anymore. They've always had like these kind of tensions between them, and so like Super Bruce Wayne, he told him, dude, you have to stop. He's like, Bruce Wayne, you have to stop. Something's not right about you. And he's like, I can see your heart. It's palpitating too hard. And Batman is like, no, blah blah blah. He's just like going all crazy. He keeps fighting with Superman with the super suit. And then all of a sudden, Batman is like gonna deliver like the killing blow to Superman because he has like the suit made of like kryptonite. and all of a sudden he just freezes, grabbing Superman, and then just Batman just faints, and Superman is like, "Oh, what's going on?" And the thing is, Superman wants to help him, but he can't help him because, oh, alrighty, good night, JLG. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Well, here's
And
something I find interesting about what you're saying, what you're telling me here. Oh, who left? Oh,
yeah,
okay,
JLG. I don't know how you pronounce it. Yeah, okay.
very good.
Yeah, go for it.
So what we're speaking about here are basically plot synopses between what we would actually probably describe as the modern day gods of our Western society, and very much so akin to, the, well, what was it? Homer and his myths. Whereas, even though he is attributed to their authorship, it is actually unknown who put, pen to quill
Right.
for the purpose of actually recording these tales, because up until then they had never been written, apparently. In this case, although they are written and they are presented in a way that can be documented and recorded and enjoyed by future generations, I genuinely do believe that, let's just say, we enter into a new dark age.
Okay.
So, like, when what's-his-name came by and I spoke about what might end up becoming like a potential collapse of human society because of strained resources. The very much so bleak outlook of the fact that people can no longer enjoy their lives because they're focusing so much upon survival because of a strained resource, because of a planet that has strained resources. So everything collapses. Dear God, we end up having like what would basically be considered to be a mass extinction,
Right.
followed by a very select group of people who are actually able to survive, either because they were rich or lucky or both.
Or smart or something.
Yeah, fortuitous in some way.
Right.
However, over time, much of these ideas have fallen to, obscurity, and these are found again. I wouldn't be too surprised if, say, even an alien civilization comes by and picks those things up. They wouldn't consider those to be performances. Those would be considered to be stories that, although exaggerations, are tales by which, or examples by which individuals can live by. They wouldn't have any understanding of the cultural significance behind the Black Panther, however. Like, they would have to view the rest of Earth's history to be able to
Right.
identify the point behind that. But if you have scholars either of another Renaissance following some kind of fall of human civilization and these stories are forgotten, or you have an alien civilization that's able to actually translate our languages and understand the history of the United States at the very least, where these films originated. Again, they probably wouldn't consider these to be, products of what had occurred, because Black Panther doesn't have the kind of message that's delivered if, there wasn't, the United States didn't have the kind of history that it did with those of the African culture, with those of African descent. The message of power coupled with the respect to the respective culture. All that is lost without an understanding of the past, as well as the current events. They're made all the more palatable because of what occurred in Ferguson. They're made all the more palatable because of what occurred in our U.S. history. They're made all the more palatable because of even something as obscure yet still tragic as the Tulsa race riots. I genuinely believe, because of that, it could very feasibly be said that that's how those stories that featured those gods that I mentioned earlier portray idealistic examples of how these people should operate, or examples of how the viewership wishes that they could exist within. It's all like, I have fewer economic opportunities. My life has fewer opportunities because of it, and I associate that with my race. And these stories tell them, no, that's not true. I can identify with these individuals, and they can tell me I can be more. Like I said before, that even factors into the already relatively affluent middle class male with Tony Stark. It's all like, I wish I was more. No, wait, I can become more. I can be just like that guy if I try hard enough.
Yeah.
These are mythical figures that are infused with relatable human elements. They are
Right.
flawed individuals, but they still present examples of how, despite their flaws, they can achieve great things, and they do not allow their respective limitations placed upon them by society to stop them.
Yeah, I get it. I guess like it's like it depends on like every author of these like story. Like how can I explain it? Every author tells their own story in a way. Like you don't make a book like to not tell some kind of story related to you. Pretty much every story you write is like related to you in some way or another. And whether you think about it or not, you like subconsciously end up writing about yourself in books, you know?
Oh,
And
very.
and like yeah, exactly. And it's like you said, these are you can identify to these people because look, this was written by a human being, an actual person. Characters are fictitious, they do present human qualities or characteristics. Um, some of them, like you said, they're like middle class or whatever, but they have limitations or whatnot. But they have superpowers, but they can become. And it's like you can identify. You could be like, oh, I'm like that superhero. I came from that. I lost my parents this soon, this early on, but even then, I'm still doing well. It's things like that. It's like pretty much every person can identify to like there has to be at least one superhero you can identify with. You can be
Oh,
like, yeah, that guy's like me. There's so
yes.
many damn superheroes. So like you don't just have to like identify to one. You can identify to various. And it's just like yeah.
Yes. Um, absolutely. That statement that there has to be at least one superhero that I, being the individual, can identify with. I mean, and to reiterate a previous point, there is a very good reason why, or a very good explanation, I should say, why businesses were perfectly happy catering to the feminist movement of having only female screenings of Wonder Woman. I'm actually kind of surprised that there weren't any, African individuals of African descent only screenings of the Black Panther.
Hmm.
I am somewhat surprised that that didn't exist, at least somewhere here in the States, most likely in a southern state, where individuals of that descent are still oppressed.
Right.
Um, it's always been that way. When I say always been that way, we the the transgressions of the ideologies that fuel this sort of behavior are going to take a very long time, not to be forgotten, but to be answered for by the cultural shifts, because despite the fact that the Emancipation Proclamation occurred during the sparked the Civil War, or was
Right.
an element of it, it wasn't until a century later that a single individual amongst that race who was emancipated was
Martin Luther.
finally able to represent the collective voice of his people, to finally get some kind of movement that the initial proclamation was set to establish.
Right.
And even then, that only occurred, what, 50 years ago?
A little bit more. 60s.
It was the 60s, yeah. So you have
Like 50 years ago. Yeah, somewhere around there.
exactly. It occurred only 50 years ago. Based upon the pace of that kind of progress, I wouldn't expect to see a situation where an individual who is of Caucasian descent would be able to take what was referred to as the thematic apperception test, also known as the racism test, to where a majority of said individuals are actually able to pass it.
Hmm.
So are you familiar with that test, by the way?
No, I'm actually not.
Okay. So the thematic apperception test basically, and I think there might be a few problems associated with its methodology as well, because I personally believe that it involves priming.
Okay,
But-
let me just tell you. Can I just tell you something real quick?
Yeah?
Okay. You might think I'm stupid. Anyway, but okay, the thing is, okay, this is probably just me, but I just feel many times these kind of tests are really, how can I explain it, relativistic in a way. It's just some things are just really hard to measure,
Um,
you know? And it's like it's not something that you could just be like, oh, 2 plus 2 equals 4. No, it's not. It's something that you can't really. It's kind of intangible in a way, you know.
well, that's the
And
reason. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Oops.
no, well, but it just in general, that's why I think it's kind of difficult. It's kind of like also like IQ test, right? Sure, you might find a person that has like 300 IQ. It's just exaggerating there because obviously no one has that much. But like the thing is, though, you could be like, oh, you could find an individual that has like 300 IQ, but what have they discovered? What have they done? Sometimes they don't do anything. You know, it's just like, oh, okay, they have 400 IQ, whatever, but they don't do anything. Either you can consider it a superpower that they're not putting to use, or they just lack creativity or something.
Creativity, motivation, what have you. But I
Yeah,
will agree.
yeah, but it's like, what happened? You know, they have that. Not even Einstein had that much IQ, but why are they not doing more things? Is there that they're just no more things to cover that we've advanced so far, or what is it? You know, I don't think that's the problem that there isn't things to discover. But it's like, what what are they doing? You know?
So the key word we're looking for there is engagement, and this kind of deviates from
Engagement.
the point that I wanted to get across here.
All right, but
But
yeah, tell me your
that
point,
is a
please.
separate conversation, although I think it's a very important one. So allow me to finish up this previous point, and then we'll get to that.
Go for it. Go for
All
it.
right. So the thematic apperception test, it's a, it's referred to as the racism test, mainly because of the fact that it measures the delay it takes for an individual to be able to associate an individual of a certain race with a certain association. I said associate twice, but I mean literally it is an association test. So
Hmm.
what it basically shows is individuals who are of Caucasian descent who were raised in predominantly Caucasian environments with limited and very likely oftentimes stereotypical examples of individuals of African descent. There's a delay when attempting to disassociate an individual of African descent from some kind of element of violence, be it a gun or any other sort of association with crime.
Mm-hmm.
It is shown consistently that individuals of that specific demographic that I just spoke of,
Right.
who were raised in that environment, show that delay, which shows an implicit bias. And that's why I said earlier regarding passing it. I believe it is going to take another century at least for any individual, any specific individual, in a random selection to be able to take that test and not show that delay, to where there is no significant difference in the amount of delay that they use to disassociate those of Caucasian descent with violence than those of African descent with violence.
Hmm.
I mean, there's a reason why that test exists, and to kind of tap into what you spoke about earlier, there's a reason why in psychology we refer to those things as constructs, because
Constructs.
they're untangible. You cannot
Mhm.
see them. You can measure air pressure because you can directly interact with it. You can measure temperature because you interact with it.
Right.
One could even say, however, that temperature, and Metha is entirely more of an expert on this than I am because that actually delves within the field of physics or physical
Mhm.
science. But my understanding is that heat is a byproduct of energy displacement, I want to say. One could even go so far as to say that heat is a construct of an energy source of some kind. I might be
Okay.
that might be a bit of a stretch, actually an incredible stretch, because again, I am mixing what is essentially a social science that measures intangibles with a physical science that measures tangible things. Because even heat, if I'm not mistaken, exists as some kind of a wave. Again, Metha is more of an expert on this, so it's up to him to confirm or deny this. Now, because I don't know if there's any inherent mass associated with heat. That's more so just a transference of energy.
Okay. Okay. But
But-
I get your point. I get your point. Yeah.
But moving forward, So the reason why those tests can be so inaccurate is because you end up having threats to the construct you're trying to measure, and they mainly just have to do with contaminations of the test. There's a reason why you would have like set procedures for any sort of experimental design within any science, including social science. But the reason why social science actually has far more errors is because it's so difficult to control for them. So if you've taken any chemistry class, I'm certain you're already familiar with the concept of contamination, cross-contamination, correct?
Maybe in Spanish, but in English, I have no idea.
That's fine. Okay, so practically speaking, you're taking a solution, a fluid, sucking it into a dropper of some kind. You then, drip a certain amount of that fluid into a measuring device of some kind, be it like forgive me, I'm losing my terminology here because I want to say petri dish, but that's more so used for biology. It'd be some kind of a test tube, of some kind.
Right.
You want to measure a reaction between these two solutions, and through some means, typically just through mixing them. Well, one thing you do not do is if you have any leftover solution, you don't pour that original solution back into its original flask, because that is actually introducing some kind of a cross-contamination, because that fluid, when it entered into that dropper, now has some elements of some residuals that are not particular of that original fluid. That is contamination. As technical as that is, that also factors into human existence. There is a reason why in human existence we try to measure a social science in controlled conditions so that we can, again, control for as many of those residuals as possible. But because there still is so much error despite the amount of control we try to place upon what we're attempting to measure, i.e. the construct, the intangible, that's where we allow as much error as we do, which is also why so much error exists, which is why some people actually challenge many of the results that come out in these studies, because so few of them can actually be replicated, because there's a very likely possibility that the findings are actually more so a result of the environment than what was actually trying to be tested. There are so many residuals there that it essentially corrupts your results. And I can't say it corrupts the data, because data itself cannot be corrupted. Data is just a collection of information. But when it comes to consistency, that is where that corruption actually comes into play.
So it's like you can't really get to one simple
You can, but you need to allow a lot of error to be able to find consistency. Yes.
Okay, right.
Yes. So it's all about that consistency. And a lot of the time, our science, being the social science, the reason why it's laughed at by the harder sciences is because of that lack of consistency, because of that allowance for error. And as a side note, I can tell you that in this field, we run into a lot of problems because of application. So sometimes even if you do run a study within a controlled environment, the controlled environment lacks external validity, i.e. its occurrence within the wild, within the real world, because because those corrupting forces are not controlled for in a day-to-day existence. Which is why out in the field you actually want to do randomized selection, so you do have those corrupting forces that are specific to each individual, then randomized amongst everybody. But it's so hard to do that within an organization, my field, or many other fields within the social science, because if you're not dealing with samples that are set within their pre-existing environments. You're instead dealing with convenience samples.
Right.
And a convenience sample basically is, I don't know, like to fall into the realm of pup psychology, working within mental health hospitals. That's a convenience sample. You want to go to study individuals who actually have those conditions. One corrupting factor might be the fact that they come from families that have the resources to be able to allow those people to receive that treatment to begin with. If you're studying people who have schizophrenia, one corrupting force would be every single one of those people who have schizophrenia within that environment have families that are able to support them being there. But there are many other people who may have schizophrenia who don't have those resources available to them, who you never get to study because they're out on the streets.
Okay.
That's where it gets so difficult to be able to explain explain the legitimacy of what is being measured in many tests. Because, again, like I said before, and I've really been driving this point home, all those corrupting forces, all those residuals that corrupt the construct you're actually trying to measure to begin with.
Okay. Okay. This is something that you kind of remind me of. It's like, how they do like these social experiments. They're like, oh, they get maybe like 100 people or something like that, and they're like, oh, of different races. But usually they get them from places like around that area, or they don't just go like, oh, I'm gonna take one person all the way from Africa, one person all the way from China, one person from like, these other countries. That requires loads of money. Some studies do, but not everyone has that kind of resources to like collect like so much data from different corners of the world. But it's like, sure, they might find in one certain study, oh, look, giving these certain people certain foods cured their cancer or some kind of crap like that. Like, sure, it might be true inside that small, like, controlled test of 100 people or 10 people, whatever you want to call it. But worldwide, if you would actually do a worldwide test, it would be like probably way different, And it's just like you can't really specifically like generalize everything. Sure, it might work here in a controlled amount of people, controlled what you would call it, in a controlled environment per se. But once it comes to like in the wild, as you say, like the whole world, it could be really different. So you can't generalize and say, oh, just because it worked here, it worked everywhere else. No, it doesn't work like that.
You're correct on that one. So that is where one of my arguments comes in. I actually had a discussion with one of my professors about why even bother with performing studies, particularly regarding industrial organizational psychology, within lab settings, because organizations typically operate within enclosed environments. These environments are segregated from the rest of the society. Even if it's a public service environment, there still is an organizational culture that is oftentimes separate from the surrounding one.
Right.
If you look at how teams operate, these teams may consist of individuals who come from an individualistic society, who are part of the organization because they wish to achieve their own individualistically oriented ends, but inside of the organization, they operate in a way that's very akin to what you might see in a collectivistic culture. Or you might, in a collectivistic culture, see an organization that hires highly specialized individuals to work on their own respective projects. They might work as part of a team, to achieve an overall end goal. But when it comes to how they're interacted with, because of how specialized that field is, or their task is compared to their peers, it is very likely that culture might operate more, at least from a practical standpoint, more so from an individualistic model. Because a collectivistic orientation would be completely, I want to say the word, it would be completely incompatible. However, In the previous case, even though the culture itself would be collectivistic, these individuals are individualistic because they come from individualistic cultures, which means as far as reward systems are concerned, they would be individualistically oriented. So individualized praise and promotional opportunities. Whereas in the individualistic organizational culture that operates within a collectivistic society, as an individual achieves success within his or her highly specialized task, the overall orientation and the overall reward scheme, the reward system, would be oriented towards the team. So instead of, Susie, you did well, team, everyone did well. They won't even mention that it was Susie's work that probably made it work or not. They'll say, team, everyone did well. Congratulations.
Can I just say something?
Yeah?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's something I was talking about the last time we had one of so-called Pope podcasts. How I was telling you, like, for example, like Elon Musk gets all this praise, right? But the thing is, he's not like, okay, sure, he gets all these scientists or whatever you want to call it, people, he has these crazy ideas, but in the end, the people that end up doing the actual work, the hard work, the thinking, and everything, it's like the scientists, the physicists, and all those people that he has contracted and stuff like that. But in the end, who gets the praise? Like, oh, Elon Musk is creating space age. Or, for example, in medicine, suppose you work for GlaxoSmithKline, you discover a cure for cancer, some kind of cancer, or something like that. Who gets the praise? GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, not you. They'll be like, oh, sure, good job. You discovered the cure for cancer. They're just gonna continue paying you the same amount of money, but they're gonna since you work for them, they're gonna take your job. I mean, the thing you discovered. Since you're working under them, your discovery, whatever, it belongs to them. So it's like rip. You're gonna get the team that work together. They're gonna be like, oh, good job, team. You guys discovered this. But like the patent, it now belongs to them, and they're gonna make the money off of it, not you. And in the end, the big ones, the other ones, like the company is gonna get the praise in the end.
So there are two facets to this.
Okay.
You are indeed very correct. When we have our first successful colony on the Mars, who's the one who's going to be receiving all the praise by the media, at the very least? Not within the organization, but within the external culture. You're correct. Elon Musk.
Right.
However, I can very much so assure you that within that organization, they're not going to have a picture of Elon Musk saying, "Congratulations, Elon Musk. You are the reason why we succeeded." No.
No, of course not.
There's going to be physicists, there's going to be team coordinators, there's going to be individuals who are going to receive the praise of, "You are the reason why we did so well here. Congratulations. Here's your bonus because, I don't know, we found some kind of rare element on Mars that suddenly made Elon Musk not only a billionaire, but a zillionaire." It's like, congratulations. Elon, the work of Elon Musk alone allowed him to make so much money that he practically collapsed the respective economy in which he operates, i.e. the U.S. currency drops in value for some reason. I mean, if it's, or I don't know. If anything else, it actually caused it to go up. But
Right.
what I'm really trying to get at here is maybe the price of gold would drop, like exponentially, because we find so much of it on Mars. Just for example, it's unlikely because it mainly would be iron, not gold. But still, let's just say
Right.
we find like a huge stockpile of, say, platinum, for example, which is worth even more than gold, and
Right.
we find it in as a source to where it doesn't even need to be refined. Like,
Oh my.
I don't know. Let's go science fiction here. They find the platinum not because it would be a naturally occurring element there, but because an alien spacecraft crashed there, and it is made entirely of platinum for some stupid reason. All they have to do is just dig that thing up and send it back to Earth, and the cost of sending it back more than makes up for the actual for the initial. return on investment more than makes up for the cost of actually going to Mars, funding the research team who came across and found it, and then the elaborate device that was responsible for bringing it back to Earth. I mean, and at that point, when that thing arrives here, the price of platinum immediately drops. Of course, Elon Musk has already cashed out. He has even more money, which then is, of course, sent to fund and promote the individuals who are responsible for funding that ship to begin with. I mean, there's kind of a trickle-down effect regarding that. I'm certain everyone's familiar with that kind of thing. But my point being, though, is that, yes, even though Elon Musk himself does benefit and his company benefits, it's because his company benefits that the individuals who operate within it also are able to achieve some level of success. And that is how that sort of thing works from an individualistic standpoint. That is also the reason why, an environment such as that, why organizations actually do operate, while not in a vacuum, largely segregated from their surrounding societies, from their surrounding cultural orientations.
Okay, just another something I was thinking about that may also affect or be a factor in affecting the results is, like you said, when they do these kind of social tests or whatever, they're usually isolated, right?
Social tests are isolated, so you're referring to a controlled experiment.
Right, like let's say they choose like suppose they want to measure penis size or something like that, something crazy. Yeah, but
Okay.
suppose they choose like 100 individuals. They're gonna take them their place, right? They're gonna have like a certain factory or some kind of like laboratory or whatever. I don't. And they're gonna be like isolated, like you said, isolated from actual society. And what I was thinking about is, I don't know if this might affect. It might sound crazy, but if, for example, let's say, like, not like suppose it's some kind of test, like some kind of psychological test or some kind of thing. Um, I feel like this might be also a factor in affecting it, and it might sound crazy or it might sound my, but I personally I think it's something that affects because, like, for example, architecture. In architecture, you have to kind of study psychology because you have to try to understand like the your client what he wants. So you want to be like, oh look, in this room here, this is where the best temperature is at. This is gonna be their bedroom because this is where they're gonna sleep comfortably. You want that place to be their bedroom, or you want their bedroom to, but you also want their bedroom to be located in a place that won't receive as much sound. So it's like you have to kind of like be thinking of all these factors. So what I was thinking about is like maybe in these kind of like there's might be so many factors in these kind of social things. Is like maybe you got like one of like of the 100 people that you got for some kind of psychological test, maybe one of them is a woman and they're on their period or they're having some kind of problem or something like that that might be a factor in affecting how they think or how they are at that current moment. Not just that, but the temperature in there, the surrounding, or how they feel in general, like being there, isolated, thing like that. They might feel uncomfortable, but even though they're getting money, sure, you might pay the money, or you might not. It might be voluntary, but they might be thinking other things, and it's just like so many damn factors you can't really measure in. And I just feel that's kind of like a thing effect, psychologically or in some way. Does that make any sense?
Um,
I know it's crazy, but
could
it's like
you
you might.
condense that for me? Because I
Can
think
I,
that you made a lot of points, but I'm kind of looking for a overall
okay.
cohesive argument that you had to
Okay,
offer.
so what I'm trying to say is that suppose it's a social experiment that's been done isolated.
Uh huh.
It occurs in a laboratory. It's not gonna occur like in the wild. Maybe they might do it in the wild. But the thing, what I'm saying is, there's so many damn factors that might be affecting the individual. Like I said, it could be a woman that's on her period, that she's having some kind of issues or something. So it's gonna affect her emotions or so. Like, how can I explain it? Her self. And not just that, but also like, okay, so there might be some kind of temperature might even feel like maybe let's suppose like in the like the laboratory where it happens, it might be cold in there or chilly. Like, how is that going to affect the person's emotions or the person psychologically? So then, if they're affected psychologically or emotionally, they're going to give certain results. But what if they were warmer? They're going to give out maybe other results. You know?
So here's what you do about that. I'm understanding better what you're referring to now.
Okay.
So remember how I mentioned earlier the amount of error that exists within the field of social science?
Right.
All right. So the idea that we're talking about, we're studying something. And firstly, if we're talking about just a single woman here, under the conditions that she is operating within, both biologically as well as environmentally,
Mm-hmm.
that would fall under the realm of a case study. And case studies are what are referred to as small n designs. They are not what you would call experimental because you're not controlling conditions. You're not controlling for anything. You're simply observing a phenomenon as it occurs right in front of you, and you document what you've seen, and you use that as the model by which you explain something that typically wouldn't be able to be observed. Now, if you were actually able to pass some kind of review board to replicate to see if these conditions are consistent amongst women who are experiencing that specific biological function at this same day of the week, same temperature in the room, to see if all those factors affect them, then you might be able to have a case for a quasi-experimental design. It probably would be more experimental. Yeah, it would still be quasi-experimental because if you're doing it one by one and you are establishing different groups, the fact that even though you're controlling for the day in the week, as well as the stage of that biological process, as well as the temperature of the room and everything else, the mere fact that these observations are occurring at different times in existence, that alone is a corrupting factor.
Right.
And individuals who are far more academic than myself, despite the fact that I myself am actually in a master's program, would refer to that as, an extraneous variable of some kind. But I prefer the call them corrupting factors because that is exactly what they are. They are factors that corrupt your results.
Your results, okay. Yeah.
And as a side note, people who do operate within the scientific community, the best minds are typically rather unimaginative. Granted, that's not incredibly a criticism, because as I have stated before, I would gladly trade every single creative cell in my brain and exchange it for something very akin to what Metha has going on in his. I would love to have his intelligence. Let me stroke the ego of yours, Metha, but I'm serious when I say that. Because I know that my academic life would be far easier if I was as smart as you. So, moving forward, though.
Okay.
Even though you wouldn't be able to achieve a true experimental design, you could definitely see if certain trends seem to be consistent. If you can find similarities between case studies, you definitely have more credence to what is actually discovered under those very specific conditions. But case studies are important because of the identification of consistent trends. However, it is indeed also correct to say that even though these trends are identified, that doesn't necessarily merit an explanation for why they occur. Now, and same condition, and let's just say you're measuring, I don't know, any sort of ability to complete a task. So, how can I even incorporate something along the lines as that? Okay, how about just academic performance?
Okay.
Just academic performance, and as a side note, it should be mentioned that women, females in general, typically perform better in an academic setting than males, bar none. And that mainly has to do with the fact that women typically score higher in the personality construct of conscientiousness, or I should say personality dimension of conscientiousness, which basically pertains not only to work ethic but also organizational skills, and overall work performance. So,
Okay.
but let's just say that let's just say that the biological event that you referred to earlier, you wanted to see if that actually affects their ability to perform well.
Wait. Give me a second.
Well,
Okay.
what you
No,
would
I
do,
just-
what you would do is that you would actually take women who were in all four primary stages of that cycle. So
Okay.
those who are going through the event that you mentioned earlier, you also those who have PMS, those who are ovulating, and those who are in a state where, if I'm not mistaken, nothing is going on. I am not a gynecologist, so I cannot state if what I'm saying is truly factual. Perhaps
Okay.
for all I know, there are as many stages as there are days in a month. So, as a man, I cannot claim to understand how a woman's body works, nor am I a gynecologist. That being
Okay.
said, under this proposed example of how you would design this study, you would be able to tell if there is a difference in academic performance amongst the women, and a significant difference, by the way, amongst women amongst women with regard to academic performance in relation to these stages in the monthly cycle.
Mhm.
By comparing their performance, making sure that the data is collected at the exact same time, for the exact same amount of time, under, practically identical atmospheric conditions.
Oof.
And another thing you can do is you set them up in these experimental conditions, but as far as their actual selection is indeed concerned, you actually, first and foremost, you get some kind of a form that says, asks them if they want to take part in the study. You be very clear to them what it is you're studying, and if they receive consent, if you do receive consent from them to be placed within it. And you could actually throw in the random element that's required for greater consistency of results. Because one thing you want to do in social science, and I know I'm explaining a lot to you, but there's a reason why social science requires so much additional work because of all these corrupting factors. One of the best ways to get more accurate results is to have what is referred to as random assignment. You can have random selection, but random selection occurs so rarely within this science that you have to go with random assignment instead. So you get your convenience sample, women who typically would be in a college setting, because they're young, they most likely are still experiencing these phases, and you let's see here. You have to do it all at the same time. See, that's where it gets difficult. But if you're somehow able to randomly place them into these respective stages, and measure them all at once, you would be able to probably identify if there's a difference in academic performance based upon that biological cycle. And then, even if you get non-significant results, you can at least identify if there's an effect size, which is something that probably taps into a little bit what one of your concerns is. Because not only do you need to identify if there's a significant difference between groups, but you need to also identify if there's a significance of effect. So, in any research field, you will have what is referred to as statistical power, and that power is largely determined by the size of your sample. So, you can probably find a significant effect for any study done in the social science if you have enough people. However, when it comes to reporting your results, if you actually managed to be able to find 100 women for each group, so 400 participants,
Mm-hmm.
to somehow, randomly assign, to their selective groups, or even better, just identify at what point in their cycle that they're actually going to be experiencing this, and simply have there be like a random selection instead. So half the women that said they were okay with doing it, you simply don't contact, which of course will reduce your size, but at least it introduces some kind of random element that I had a difficult time explaining to you earlier. That alone will help to make your results even more accurate. If you can't do a random assignment, you can do random selection. But if you have that large enough group, and if that group is actually large enough to find your significant effect, but if you have like a really tiny effect size, while it might be true that based upon which phase in their cycle they're actually affected on an as far as academic performance is indeed concerned, if the effect size is so is so incredibly minute that it doesn't matter, then a woman might not be able to claim that she didn't perform well on an exam because she was actually at the height of that cycle. In other words, she was experiencing those cramps.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave you a very long-winded and quite possibly overly elaborate answer to your question, but I wanted to present the answer to you from an applied standpoint, because I am not somebody who tolerates answers solely from a theoretical standpoint. I am much more about process.
Right. Okay, I get you.
I am about, I don't care what was found. While I will say what was found is really great for a table conversation, I want to know, like, how you do it. It's like how does one go about doing this kind of thing? Because I'm very results oriented, and the best way to find results is by understanding how the process was actually done. Especially once again when studying these non-tangibles, because an untangible is the actual ability to perform academically. You have a tangible result, because that can actually be measured by the grade that people receive from their work. But there are you still have elements that corrupt your results, because then at that point, it might be better to do what is referred to as instead of a between groups design, you could do a within groups design. The within groups design would basically ask not different women at different respective phases to take whatever kind of test you have for them, but instead have a group of women who are randomly selected and then randomly, who are indeed randomly selected to take very similar tests at 4 different points. And now that I'm really thinking about this, there might be a better means of doing this. At 4 different points during their cycle to see if there is a significant difference between those administrations. But again, you have to kind of ask yourself, if the woman has been exposed to the same test 4 times, wouldn't that alone actually make her better at it? And that's where you start, throwing in what are referred to as equivalent forms. So if you're familiar with placement tests, that is how you would probably measure the academic performance regarding that. But you still have to, and that would probably do a good job of controlling for the variability as far as academic performance is indeed concerned.
Okay,
but the reason why you would want to randomly select is if you just select by a convenience sample, for all you know, every single woman in that class is a B student. Instead of having one woman being like an A, another woman being like a B, another woman being like a C, another woman actually practically failing out of the program, but she's kept it in anyway because her daddy is the coordinator.
Oh my.
So there's a lot to consider whenever you work in the field of social science, but it's because of all that stuff that one needs to consider that we allow for as much error as we do.
Okay, okay. Well, damn. Actually, so talking about all this, I never actually imagined social sciences to be like this complicated. But yeah, it makes sense because like physics and all these kind of things, you can actually measure them. You actually like, but once it's social where you have intangibles and you have so many factors, as you said, corrupting factors. You could also have you could say corrupting factors in other like scientific experiments, but it's more controlled and it's possibly find out later on. But like in this kind of how can I explain it? In this kind of situation, it's like too many damn things to measure that you just can't really get. You can get accurate results, but not like perfect results, right?
So again, that's why we allow for so much error to begin with.
Allow for error, yeah, right. Margins of error, so you could be like 5% or something like that, right?
You're right. Yeah, about 5%. Let's see here. Yes, 5%. So the problem with that is that actually factors into what is referred to as type 1 and type 2 error. So type 1 error is considered to be far worse than type 2 error, and I'll explain that to you. Type 1 error basically is that despite your best efforts, you found a significant effect when there actually was none. So you don't even mean to lie, but you're showing again you're showing information that is actually false. Whereas type 2 error is you found no significant difference, where indeed one truly does exist. And the reason why we set it at 5% is, if there are 20 studies released, all of them following the exact same procedure, obviously with different groups, different individuals, but, and you find consistent results across all of them, let's just say that in all 20, they found significant differences. One of those studies found those differences erroneously. Yeah. And that is a risk that that as a science we're actually willing to accept. That's one reason why we engage in meta-analyses. Meta-analyses allow us to identify, if these trends truly do exist, and if those studies actually do have external validity. Because external validity is very important in the field of social science. Even more so, it's important to identify amongst this effect amongst all the studies that have been done, not just the ones that were actually published, which that factors into, of course, another issue regarding academia. The studies that have or show, I should say, non-significant differences typically don't get published in those big journals, because you get published and you're able to keep your job at your respective university typically, whereas it's actually far more important to publish, and it's more important for journals to at least consider publishing studies that showed null effect. There were no significant differences between groups, and here is why. So when you do a meta-analysis, you can identify a much more accurate picture of just how strong of a presence these constructs actually have. Does it get complicated? Yes. But
Indeed.
it's actually through this very messy process that we've been able to find some consistent constructs that exist even across cultures. One of the hallmarks that currently exists within psychology, practically every single field of psychology, by the way, has to do with personality. And are you by any chance familiar with what is referred to as the Myers-Briggs personality assessment?
Nope.
Okay, so the Myers-Briggs basically is this highly publicized, highly marketed personality assessment that makes somebody like, I don't know, an ISTJ. Like there's like 3 letters that are supposed to somehow label the kind of individual somebody is. Are you familiar with that?
Okay, yeah, I took one of them because my friend, she kept bothering me. See what
So
apparently I got INFJ or INFP. I don't remember something.
yeah.
But go on, go on.
So here's the problem with that. That test, despite the fact that it does have some personality elements that are accurately recorded, it has others that are not. So very typically, the first letter, which determines one's extroversion to introversion, and then that last letter, which measures what? There's like judging and feeling. I think that's what it is. Those are typically fairly consistent.
Feeling.
Okay, thank you. Those are fairly consistent across test administrations. Then there's those 2 other letters in between that show a lot of variability between administrations. Now, proponents of that test will actually be more than happy to explain to you that those are the more shifting elements of your personality. The problem with that, though, is that those shifting elements of one's personality, those are factored into the description of what those 4 letters actually mean, which affects its reliability. Now, here's why that's important. If a test, which is supposed to measure a consistent construct such as personality, has low variability, has low consistency, so has very high variability, that actually affects its validity as well. So, understand that in order for a test, like I said before, in order for a test to be valid, and by valid I mean it's testing what it's supposed to, it has to be reliable first. After that, the validity of that test comes into question, and there's a variety of ways by which you're able to establish that. Based upon how new the construct is, based upon how new the measure's existence is, or what you're actually trying to identify, you have various things you can use to increase the validity. But usually, the very first form of validity has to do with content. So you just kind of make sure that the questions that you're asking these people seem to be related to what you're measuring by subjecting those questions to what are referred to as subject matter experts, and they just kind of take a look at these questions and say, yeah, it looks all right, or no, it doesn't. And then you do some inter-rater reliabilities. And the higher the inter-rater reliability is regarding the validity of that content to what you're trying to measure, the higher the validity of your test is. But you have to make sure that you get consistent results before you even do that. Very messy work. So going back to that Myers-Briggs.
Right.
It's unreliable. If it's unreliable, its validity isn't even a question because it doesn't have any. Right now, however, there's a lot of research supporting what is referred to as the Big Five. And apparently there's one more that has to do with 6 personality aspects. And I want to say it's honesty. I want to say the 6th one that's been proposed is some kind of honesty attribute, I believe. And but the Big Five personality assessment, or the personality assessments that measure the Big Five, those have been shown to be far more reliable. And when they're more reliable, then you can actually start asking the important questions regarding validity. And that high consistency alone does a much better job of being able to identify how a person is going to act, and even more so, what they're likely to do in a given situation. So, let's just, as an example, we watched Matt play Fire Emblem every single, at least once a week, I should say. We watch him play Fire Emblem, and we even refer to it as, it's called Fail Emblem Mat of Radiance. because it's also and the channel that we watch it in is called Matt Fails at Fire Emblem. However, he actually has yet to lose a single unit despite having Ike die twice on him, because we have like an Iron Man thing going on to where if he loses Ike or any other character that causes the mission to reset, he's able to get by on that. But if he loses a unit, if he loses anybody and the game is able to continue playing, he can't reset the mission. So, but he also has a litany of Fire Emblem veterans making fun of the game's characters, as well as coaching Matt on how to approach very dangerous situations throughout each of the missions. And we hark on that whenever he makes poor choices. That last element is where I wanted to focus upon. There's of the big five, one of them is neuroticism. And individuals who score high on neuroticism, which is also known as being low on emotional stability, if Matt were to score high on neuroticism, the amount of times we rip into him regarding his poor choices in Fire Emblem would actually probably cause him to stop doing that entirely in a positive situation. And in a negative situation, he would flat out snap and start yelling at us to shut up and say terrible things about us online. Because an individual who would be higher in neuroticism, i.e. lower in emotional stability, would consistently do that.
Snap, yeah.
Yeah. So, the Myers-Briggs doesn't measure that.
Oh.
And if it did, and if it does, in one of those, 4-letter combinations, that 4-letter combination isn't going to show up consistently. So, that's the importance of the very messy process by which we engage in our research. That's also one reason why I'm not going after a PhD. As you could tell by how I rambled and how we will go about actually doing this experiment, I'm not apt enough at experimental design to actually take on the responsibility of making these experiments, setting up the design for them, and then publishing papers on that. I wouldn't be able to take that kind of stress. I would much rather consume the knowledge generated by PhD holders and apply it out in the real world. Typically because IO psychologists specifically, they typically have to work with real world environments. And even if I am charged with doing research, I'm not really allowed to alter the environments that the employees work within. So a large portion of my experimental design has already been done for me. People working in respective departments within a business.
Right.
Just as an example, I can't disrupt the operations of the business to have, all the people working in accounting to then move downstairs in the receiving room in the higher exertion environment for me to measure a construct such as, work stress or how exhaustion factors into an individual's patience at work. I can't do that.
Right.
I would, the individuals in accounting, I would have to work with some kind of experimental design that measures the amount of strain that they experience at a sit-down position versus the kind of strain that people experience in the receiving room where they're on their feet all day.
Okay.
It's
right.
Those limiting factors reduce the amount of options that I have. I have to work around those options, but at the same time, it gives me less to actually have to think about.
Right.
It's
my.
yeah. In the end, social science is indeed the messiest, I would have to say, of all those sciences. But I think we're also all familiar with how you make omelets.
With what?
Yeah. So it's always something that requires a very elaborate explanation. But when we do finally come across a consistent result, not only insignificant, but systematically, upon repetition, your significant results time and time again. That is where the true discoveries are found. And as we understand these consistent, attributes of people, these consistent non-tangibles of individuals, we understand the human condition more, and we're able to institute policies that are more conducive to these elements of the individual. For instance, when it comes to hiring, you have somebody who's actually going to be a first-line employee, so they're working with the customer directly. You want someone who is extroverted. You also want someone who's conscientious. Why do you want someone who's conscientious? Because they have a primary desire to get the job done right. Why do you want them extroverted? Because they feel comfortable working with people. Now, an introverted person is perfectly fine working with people, but it drains them faster.
Okay.
And that's that. And you hear that some people say, and this is like a tangential point, but there's a myth that I want to dispel. You may have heard that people who are introverted are shy. That's not true. Shy people are shy. An introverted person is somebody whom finds interaction with larger groups to be far less engaging and even likely to be a frustrating circumstance than an extroverted person.
Oh.
I'm certain it is no secret to you by now that I'm just about the most extroverted person you could ever run into. Because an introverted person, while still speaking as passionately about these topics as I do, they probably speak about them with the same amount of volition,
Right.
or place as much emphasis upon them as I do, they probably would be far less willing to accommodate the conversation to an ever-growing audience. Whereas for me, I think I would be more than happy to speak about even more topics if the VC were to just increase in population, which has happened in the past. There's been occasions where we would get 10 people sitting in the VC just listening to me ramble, like I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And, those conversations would go on for as long as I had an audience.
It's good. I actually enjoy it. Yes. Okay, I don't know if my mic is going on.
I think at some point we found out that the Mi6 bot actually has a recording feature on it, so we could actually bring it into these VCs and record our VCs.
Yeah, we have
beautiful.
to do that. We have to.
And I feel like we should do that at some point. Just have these conversations, and then just rip them and put them on YouTube or something. I don't know.
Well, it's funny you're saying that, because halfway through this conversation, I actually turned on OBS. So right after we had spoken about how how all the superheroes in these Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, as well as a select few within the DC movies, right after we spoke about that, I actually turned on OBS and started recording.
No,
So,
nice. Okay.
I'll be probably slapping this onto my YouTube channel, because I really am thinking of naming this the Grand Inquisition. And the reason why I say that is over in the Splatoon Discord, I nicknamed myself the Grand Inquisitor. But, instead of the way it's normally spelled, I place an emphasis on I-N-K because it's Splatoon.
Yeah, I saw your name over there. Or something like that.
Exact. Well, I think
No?
I removed the Q.
You removed the Q. Okay, then. It doesn't look right. I think you left the Q. I gotta look it up.
Hold on. I think...
Oh, yeah, you did. You did. I just looked it up. You did. You removed
Yep.
the Q.
Yeah, it's just INKU. Because the K, rather inappropriately, but the K kind of makes a K sound as well.
You're right. Look at Q. Look.
But typically it's QU. Typically Q is coupled with U to make the full sound that the full the full pronunciation that's intended to make. like quick and quiet.
Right.
Again, from like a phonetic standpoint, anyway. But anyway, so it is like immensely late for me. I have found this to be an incredibly engaging conversation, despite the fact that I will say that it consisted of me offering propositions as well as giving answers and you just speaking every now and then. But I think that's how these kind of go.
Okay, let me
Yeah,
just
yeah, that's kind of how it is. I really didn't have too much to add throughout most of that conversation. I was just kind of listening.
Yeah,
Okay.
and although, yeah, I find it to be really good practice as well regarding my master's field because it gave me an opportunity to practice up on how to engage in proper research design. Because I have a really bad habit of just kind of going with an idea and it potentially being wrong. So it's best to be able to give myself some kind of a hypothetical experimentation, I should say, on how to construct, a given experiment, should I ever have to do it in the future, which likely will be the case.
Okay. I just have something to add. Okay, so many of the time, and I wish more people would join because that brings more minds, more questions, more doubts.
The problem is that when you start talking like this, people dip.
Yeah,
They don't want to be around for these type of conversations. That's the
they
problem.
don't. You're right about
Like you can talk like this, and I'm surprised. Like Dialg was here, and he stayed in here for like 2 hours, listening. Well, no, probably like an hour and a half with just me and Dash talking about how the workforce sucks and how it's the future of what the U.S. workforce is going to look like and how the job market is going to look. And we were in here talking about that for like just sat in here and listened.
it. Well,
I feel like a lot of the times you can assess the age of the person who joins the VC when we start having these talks, if they stay in or if they leave.
Mm-hmm.
you're right. You're right.
And while Diao didn't like talk about anything during that whole time, he was actually in here. He might not have been listening, but he stayed. So
He did.
I could say that's much more than what other people would do. A lot of people would just be like, "Oh, they're talking about this type of stuff, and I just want to shit post, or I just want to have a good laugh, so I'm just gonna go somewhere else."
Well, I just do a combination of everything. You can crap posting and text to voice, listening to guys, people. So it's like, yeah. But I'm still listening. I'm still paying attention. And what I was gonna say is, I wish more people were interested in these talks because I like hearing other people's opinions. What other ideas? It's because like, okay, I know I don't know everything, so I know there's gonna be other people that are gonna have questions that I possibly want to know but can't think of. So it's like I want to know what else other people can think of or questions or have doubts about. And I like these convos. Sometimes I'm just listening because sometimes I'm not too familiar with these kind of concepts or things. You specialize in them. I don't. So I don't know as much. I might know some basic stuff, but not everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I rather listen to most things because I like to listen and like learn. But that's the thing. I also like to challenge and question things. I don't want to take everything as 100% accurate or perfect or that I should take it completely. I want to challenge it. And as you said, like you said, you can't take theory like 100%. Like you said, you have to like apply it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe in theory it works, but does it work? Why or why not, right? And yeah, that's one of the thing that I like about it. That's something I would tell like many of the people. Like, okay, so like I used to talk to this one girl, and she went to this courtroom and she was talking about how the justice system works and all these kind of things and stuff like that, and how justice is made. And I told her, hey, did you ask your teacher anything? Like, did you ask the judge anything or stuff like that? Did you challenge anything? What about those cases where there was injustice made in the courtroom? What about those celebs that did bad things but got nothing done to them? Like, what if it was an actual, like, normal cop that would have done those things? They would have gotten jailed for, like, so many years. How come that celeb didn't? And it's like, and I told her, you can't just take everything they tell you as if it's the truth. You gotta challenge it, investigate it, and see what else there is. Think a little bit different. Because if you just accept all the information as 100% like granted, you're gonna be bound to accepting wrong information.
Indeed.
And that's why I like these conversations, and I like asking questions. I like
I mean,
learning with this.
yeah. But that's something that the education system uh, has lacked. The education system doesn't teach you critical thinking. It teaches you facts and how to recall information, but it doesn't teach you how to think critically, which
Agreed.
is what our most school systems lack. If they would just allow that type of stuff, if they structure the system to where they taught the critical thinking, I feel like you'd have a lot more people in these types of VCs because they would be interested in it. If you teach it to them at the start, then they're going curious about these type of topics.
Right, right. It's
Absolutely.
like, oh yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just agreeing with Method on his statement. The only thing I would have to add to that though is there's a factor of time that is probably the most unfortunate element as to why the schooling, the education system, focuses solely upon facts as opposed to the exploration of the things that are taught to children. Because you only have so long to actually do it, and to make that content more engaging, it the people instructing it would have to be encouraged to be allowed to have those children in their classrooms for 2 to 3 times as long. And even then, a lot of the things that we're speaking about now, are not related to the STEM fields. And what I'm trying to say by that, Altador, is when you go into a math class, you are not learning math theory. And as a side note, I still hate proof. You can learn plenty of what you need to know through rote arithmetic. Perhaps the only benefit of having a longer course time in a math environment or a math class would be to be able to go to each student and have them go through the process of how they're learning to do these steps. That is extremely expensive from both a time resource as well as a monetary resource perspective, because you have to pay the teacher, you have to feed the student, and you have to make sure you keep the lights on and the room's air conditioned. So,
Right.
and then you get into those other courses, the social sciences ones, such as, interpretation of works of fiction, or an understanding of truly being able to perceive history from perhaps not as much the viewpoint of the victors, but those who lost. Let's talk about U.S. history not from the perspective of, how it expanded across the U.S., but maybe even more so from the perspective of those who were victimized by it, i.e. the Native Americans. Or you could even, or even the storied success of how the United States were actually able to achieve their independence from Great Britain. Let's explore, just conceptually think of how, and of how those on the enemy side felt about this whole thing. In any case, you could use Benedict Arnold as a case study regarding that ideology. Or at least the loyalists, what was their perspective on it. But again, you have to keep this engaging, but I think it's very difficult to be able to open up this kind of discourse. Now, one thing I will say is this. Instead of engaging in conversation, you could have assignments that encourage exploration. And maybe that might work from a more applicable standpoint, i.e., students receive a grade based upon not being able to recite rote facts, but more so exploring ideas regarding them. So that kind of falls within the criticism of having grade inflation. And grade inflation basically is, professors giving the students A's because they wrote something, instead of giving them A's because they were willing to put forth the effort to explore the information on a deeper level, or in a level that allows it to be tangentially related to a different concept of which they're knowledgeable. And the fact that the education system places has a punitive element associated with the grading scheme probably stifles that kind of ability to or desire to explore the content on a deeper level. Because in the end, I know that somebody I speak with on Discord, I can't recall who it is now, would explore the historic content in his or her papers from the perspective of historic fiction. And the argument for that is this. As long as this individual is actually able to exemplify the key points that are accurate to history, while then incorporating some of the elements of this historical fiction and how they might have occurred should alternate events occurred, I personally think that an individual deserves an A, as long, again, as those initial points that are accurate to history are made and are clearly understood. Instead, they receive a bad grade, which then affects future opportunities for the student, because scholarships, applying to universities, as well as many other things, as well as just an encouragement to understand the material, based solely upon the fact that they got a bad grade, because they didn't just regurgitate the original information.
Right. You're like killing their creativity, which will later on kind of kills your creativity,
Maybe to step this back, because you're right, and you're echoing what I was saying previously, perhaps to be a bit less verbose about it, because I think that it would be inappropriate to extend school class times to incorporate my first point, whereas it would be equally inappropriate to have all assignments have an exploratory element to them, to possibly have a couple assignments each semester that allow students to flex their creative muscle. It causes them to break outside their comfort zone. What I mean by that is the individuals who are more factually oriented, who have difficulty with the creative, elaborating a creative bent or creative aspect of themselves, they could actually produce probably a kind of like a summary of events that surround a single historical, I should say, a series of occurrences that encompass a single historical event. So it's all like, what are all the things that occurred during the U.S. during the Revolutionary War, for example, America's War for Independence, as it were, or the events that led up to and the escalation of, say, the French Revolution. Real grade school element stuff. But at the same time, there are students who would prefer to be a bit more creative about it. And then they would actually be the ones to present it from a historical fiction standpoint, as long as they actually make those elements that are historically accurate while emphasizing and able to explain them, then elaborate upon them from that creative standpoint. For a math approach, I think that teachers that provide grades not based upon the answers reached, but the processes by which the answers were reached, to at least give partial credit for incorrect answers, is very important. Because I think that we all recall the math teacher that regardless of how well you did the problem, if you got the wrong answer, 0. It's those teachers that, encourage students to show their work and go through a methodical approach, that are willing to actually look at the step-by-step processes by which these students were able to reach their final answer, be it right or wrong, at least give partial credit based upon those correct steps made up to that final erroneous answer, I think removes the sting that a punishment of a reduced point would actually provide. So instead of a 0, they get 0.5 for getting half the problem right. Or hell,
Right.
they get a 0.9 because they got the answer right, but they put the decimal in the wrong place.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
they had the idea. They just like kinda didn't do it exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
But these are problems that do not have simple answers. Even if they have simple answers from a conceptual standpoint, from an applied standpoint, they do not.
Oh yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah. One of the things that Hannah's been doing, one of my friends in near Mizzou, she works at a high school near Mizzou. What she's been doing is what's called the reversed classroom, flipped classroom.
Uh huh.
Have you guys talked about that?
I'm not familiar with it now. Hello,
It's
Indigo.
it's
Hey,
the
I
concept
spent the
of
last 5 hours talking to Puff. Why do I waste my time in my life?
So
You
anyway,
sound so
the
sleepy.
reversed classroom. Metha?
He muted himself.
He did.
Yeah.
I was typing again. The thing about the reverse classroom is that whereas in current classrooms you go to class and they teach you the stuff, then you go home and you do the homework.
Uh-huh.
This is reversed in the sense that you go home and you watch a video that teaches you the material, and then you go to the classroom and do the homework in front of the teacher.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It
So that what this type of system is trying to get people to do is to try to get them to go out there onto the web to try to learn the information themselves and try to think critically about it themselves, right? And then you bring it to class next day, and while they might go over some of the material in class, it's mostly meant to, here's your work, there's a resource if you have any questions.
You know, I can see.
It's a really interesting system, and it seems to be working well for her.
I'm glad to hear that it is. I am sincerely glad to hear
She
that.
does, but she does teach honors students, so it might be the different type of students that she teaches
That is very likely
to
the
your
case.
average student.
That is very likely the case because those students would be the ones who are driven enough to actually watch the videos and really pay attention to their content so they can perform well in class. In other words, those students who most likely, if they're subjected to a personality test, will probably score very high in conscientiousness. So, and the reason why that would be the case is that, kind of what you mentioned earlier, Altador, somebody who has really high intelligence, if they don't have the work ethic, if they don't have the desire to actually perform and use the cognitive gift that has been offered to them by either environment or genetics, or most likely a combination of both. The fact that they have the brain power is moot when it's not actually applied. A good example is actually my roommate from college, from undergrad. So he was a math major, a computer science minor. The guy, I swear to God, was born with a TI-83 in his head.
Oh my.
Yeah, he was god-awful smart. Intelligence through the roof. Could read at an alarming rate, and his reading comprehension skills, like he could read a very complicated statement and translate it into simple words, that the layman could understand after one reading. He never had to reread anything. So, and I mean, he had an interest in engineering. All right.
Okay.
What does he do now after graduation? Part-time at Quick Trip. And that's all he wants to do. Which is all well and good, it's all he wants to do, but for crying out loud. I mean, I am surrounded, and I intentionally do this, but I am surrounded by people who have incredible intelligence, but not all of them have drive.
Man, I get you.
Yeah.
I remember, you see, I've gotten a few fun stories from, like, me who are older. My dad once told me he had a from I think it was India who could do any math equation faster than he could punch it in on a calculator.
Uh huh.
Sine, sine, like tangent, like he knew all the equations to get them like off the top of his head, and you would literally give him the equation away because he had to be that fast.
Oh yeah, I've read some of the Indian mathematics. They have some sutras. It's called Vedic math. It's like really quick methods of doing complex mathematics. It's pretty interesting. I've read about it.
When you say
Yeah.
complex, are you speaking about, things that have to do with like integers
No.
in calculus?
Well, not that complex, but I mean, you can't know on your like. Maybe you can do them in your head, but for example, if you have like a 9-digit number, you want to multiply by another 9-digit number. You could do it like mentally, like really quickly.
Hmm.
Like you can't do like you could do it faster in your head using those methods than by typing it on a calculator. So like you'll spend more time typing it on a calculator than doing it in your head using their methods
That's very interesting.
and get it done well. And there's actually a book I've been reading about that from this professor that teaches those kind of things. Because it interests me, honestly. But yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Hmm. All right. Well, to save myself from being, exhausted tomorrow, I think I'm gonna try to end this conversation here.
Yeah, it's fine because otherwise we're gonna keep
Oh yeah,
deviating to other stuff, right?
we could keep
Figured I'd
going.
stop and
We could keep going for hours. Although I will say one last thing regarding what Metha pointed out earlier. Excuse me. The fact that when we're speaking about these subjects that have relevance to the real world, we typically have a smaller audience. I think that the larger groups come from when we speak about what the hell Nintendo's trying to do. So, and trying to understand that enigma. But anyway, with that being the case, guys, it was a pleasure, and you guys have a good night. Okay?
should probably get to sleep
You
too.
too, Dash. Good night.
I'm probably gonna head out as well.
Yep.
Same. Wait, you gotta show me that upload.
It has been a great night for this though, and I've learned a lot from this conversation. Anyways, it's been interesting to listen into.
Oh,
Sure.
wonderful things indeed.
Yeah.
But do show me when you upload it, dude. I want to see it.
Yeah, I'd like to listen to it again.
Okay. Well, I'll
Yeah.
go ahead and get to work on that then.
Yeah.
But you guys have a good night. All right.
Okay.
You too, guys. Thank you.
All right. Bye.